When I studied to become a brass judge in the mid-70s, the first thing I learned how to do was recognize a mistake and record it on the execution sheet, the infamous tick, which cost a drum corps 1/10 of a point. Well, we've come a long way, baby, but we're certainly not there yet. The judge's primary task remains the same, to rank and to rate. But how we get there is very different. And that's good, say some of the people who helped form that system over these past 50 years.
Our judging system is simplicity in itself.
The way that I find most effective is to start with the number 0, which isn't really a number, but we'll call it that in this case.
More like hockey.
We have a 4. Now, you carry this 0 that I put up here over to here. You have 40. That means that everyone starts out with 40.
The timing judge gets 20 points.
70. 70. 70.
And finally, the nurse gets 15 points.
And I listen to these brass lines now and these drum lines and these front ensembles and the soundscapes that people are designing, that these creators are putting out there. And I think about having to put on a green shirt and assign a number to that and rank and rate, and I can't imagine a more stressful job.
Do you feel the pressure?
No. That's a lie. You know, of course. Yeah, how could you not?
A lot of what we did was born out of the military parade formations and squads of 3, squads of 4, or whatever we were doing, straight lines. Everything we did in the early days was that. There were no curvilineas unless you were out of line.
Drum corps was really a product of the limitations. Because of the limitations we had in instrumentation, we had to develop percussion, precision marching, things like that made us unique from the band world.
And it was a different system. It was kind of a tear-down system. You start with 100 and you just take off points for things done wrong. Not a very positive approach.
We basically have to listen to the strength of the players when they're playing difficult passages, but we don't actually attribute credit to the difficulty of the music. The responsibility of the brass judge is primarily to evaluate the degree to which the performers play together.
I remember there were some sheets that we called you could tick and talk. You know, you would put the tick down on the little mark on the piece of paper, and then you talk about it. Prior to that, you would just put this mark down. And I remember driving instructors crazy because I was one of the first judges where I would put the mark down, but then I would give it some context. I just didn't identify the error. I would write a little anecdote about where it was located and why, you know, how many players were involved or whatever. And it got to be a little bit cumbersome because the sheet was just riddled with writing and so on. And they were freaking out on the sidelines because they thought I was marking ticks down the whole time.
VFW had a different set of sheets than American Legion, and some regionals had different sheets and different scoring techniques and things like that. DCI was able to standardize that, so you'd know what system you're working on. An 8 should mean roughly the same thing in Boston as it means in San Jose. And it should mean roughly the same thing in July 4th and August 4th, that you can see progression and make comparison from show to show, make comparison from region to region.
Are judges qualified? Well, the first thing, of course, is experience. The average member of our Judges Association is maybe 8 or 9 years as a playing member, then maybe 6 or 8 years as an instructor. Then and then only can he even apply for membership as a judge.
Rick Moss introduced the linear scale, and then what that meant and how it was interpreted. So let's say roughly, a 10-point scale, you say 8 to 10. Roughly 8 to 10 is an A, or 8.5, or whatever it happens to be. You know what an A means, and you know what a B means. And you have a sense when you're watching a performance. Oh, that's an A, or that's a B, or that's a C. And we kind of agree on that, and when we don't agree, at least we can talk about why we don't agree, and we can learn from each other.
So we spend all our time in polishing the one show that we have. That's really what drum corps is all about, perfection. And that's exactly what we strive to do. Every minor flaw in the music, in the marching, in the percussion section is worked on. We get to the point, hopefully by the end of our season, which is usually in August, where we're fighting for 1/10 of a point. We may take 15 minutes or half an hour or 2 hours to try and get rid of one tick or one error, 1/10 of a point.
It's part of who we are as a culture. We compare everything we do. I like that car better than this one. We may not do it with a number, but we do that subconsciously. You go to dinner, oh, it was a 10. What did you think about the drink that the guy served? It was only a 7 out of 10. I mean, I think we subconsciously rank and rate everything that we do, so we decided to put numbers on it. But, we've got tools to help us with those numbers, to try to gather a sense of what it means to be a 6 or an 8 or a 10.
The system at that point was a little bit restrictive to the creative process and the production process.
Instructors said, gee, all you're doing is marking errors. Can we get a system that allows us to be challenged? So that's where achievement started, was with those questions from the instructors. They felt limited. So how do you evolve and bring achievement rather than just, I saw a mistake, all mistakes are the same. Well, all mistakes not necessarily the same.
Little by little, the adjudication procedures opened up. The shift came away from finding errors, the tick sheet, where the corps that wins makes the fewest errors. Turning it upside down, instead of looking for errors, looking for positive, looking for who's moved the ball the most.
I think it was 1983 was the last we saw of the tick. Took us a while. I think the first convention where we talked about not all errors were the same was at a VFW convention, maybe it was American Legion, 1971. So it took us about 12 years to get to that spot where we were comfortable.
Over the years, the system, and still really to this day, the system plays catch up to where the design goes, which I think is how it should be. I think the drum corps themselves should set the direction philosophically, and then DCI and the judging community will implement that direction.
It's really the staffs, the creators, the designers, in conjunction with the judges, that's how we come up with the system. But it's really driven by the designers and the staff, and we're not telling the staff what they should do. Here's your checklist, and you better have this because this is what we're judging. This none of that. I think the system's great because it allows it to grow and evolve with the activity.
We evolved as the corps evolved, as their style of playing and their approach to musicianship and their approach to the arrangements became more complicated. We as judges had to also keep step with that.
The music judges now, I'd have to think about it, but I would suspect that all of them have at least one music degree, that all of them have marched in some capacity, maybe written in some capacity. So, so it's grown together, and it's just much more deeply rooted in a training in music and an education in music.
Judges study for years to even become a judge, and you have to learn all the criteria. You have to memorize that criteria in your different captions. And every sheet, no matter what, has a what and a how, or some design or repertoire consideration and a consideration for the performers. So everything is 50-50 between the designers and the performers.
That attack wasn't so good there by the tenor's right hand.
Now you have to verbalize it and comment on it to the group while you're judging them, and that's called judging through time. So you have to remember what you saw in the first minute of the show by the time you get to the 12th minute of the show, and how you felt at different times throughout the program, how you're reacting at different times.
I have a bias as far as certain types of design, but what I'm judging, I can't use that. I have to get beyond that. And that's where the analysis parts comes in. You say impression, analysis, comparison. Well, I have the impression, but that's subjective to me. Now, the analysis, why I have that impression, and is that because of what they're doing or because how I'm reacting to it? Is it my bias, and I have to get past that?
As judges, we're trained not to have bias, not to have prejudice towards certain groups, not to have expectations. Oh, this is the Santa Clara Vanguard. The Santa Clara Vanguard's been in the top 3 for 12 years, so I have an expectation that I'm about to see a great unit. We're trained not to do that.
People ask about the critique setting. You know, back in the day, critiques were awful and people screamed and yelled.
Marty Hurley broke a cassette player because of me. Back when we had used cassettes, he was not happy with me one night and kind of made a point of emphasis by smashing the cassette player onto the bleachers. So, yeah.
One of the instructors got up on the table and proceeded to show me what her children marched and why it was better than anyone else, and how her children marched in knee-high black boots. Scared me to death.
Most times, it's a very logical and controlled, calm manner, but sometimes people are a little bit upset because they're so passionate about it. They really believe. They own this, and somebody's been critical of what they own, or somebody's been critical of their baby, calling your baby ugly, kind of thing. So I have to say, those moments are just a matter of taking a breath, listening. Being a good listener helps a lot, and then showing them that I understand where they're at, and hopefully communicating back to them why I believe the situation is the way it is.
I look forward to that because that's the only time we get to interact with the staffs to learn more about what they're doing. And we get to ask questions and hear what they're trying to do, because not all what their visions aren't always fully developed when we see them.
So many people from the judge side have had such a huge impact on these systems and basically wrote these systems after intense conversations with instructors, designers, and their own experiences as well.
I helped to develop the visual analysis caption along with a couple of other instructors, so that makes me somewhat uniquely qualified since I have all the answers.
I try to be convincing that I'm always right. Our good friend Michael Cesario said there's 3 things in theater that really help: honesty, integrity, and when that doesn't work, fake sincerity.
I think you have to love the activity first and foremost. Like, I'm the biggest popcorn eating drum corps fan you've ever seen. And if I don't ever put on a green shirt again, I'll be fine, because I'll pay whatever I have to pay for the ticket and sit there and love every drum corps.
The folks who judge are the salt of the earth. They're not getting paid much of anything. They do it because they love it, and they love educating, and they love being able to support the activity in that way. But when you take art and you try to assign a subjective value to it, inherently, it always will come down to a personal, I like this more than that. It's not a NASCAR race. It's not a football game where they scored more points or they were faster.
We all pretend that it's a science when it's not. It's subjective, it's human, it's opinion, but it's what we have unless we want to go into a compulsory-oriented activity where everyone's doing the exact same thing and judge that, which we've done that before, right? In the past, to some extent.
Yeah, you could do it. You can do anything. They can do anything they want. I mean, that's the great great openness, but also the great challenge. You can do anything you want in this arena.
And the ones who do it the best get the most points.